Shock Piece: The Search for Freedom, a novel by C. Nguyen. Chapter 41: Tan and the Lieutenant's Exhumation, 1985. 10 years had gone by. The expatriates were moving along with changes in their life overseas, as well as the remaining population in the country. Thank you, Dr. Quang. You're very kind. Tan bowed her head to the old prisoner, showing her gratitude. Quang used to be as wiry as a dry stick, but now he looked plump. The dark skin looked moldy, with patches of whitish flakes and the yellowish tint of jaundice. His gait was slow, and he walked with small, shuffling steps, like a baby who had just accomplished its first steps, but was wary of taking long strides. It was beriberi and vitamin B12 deficiency catching up with him, Quang thought. His resilience in staying healthy in both mind and body was wearing thin. It was time to get out of here, or, like them, he would suffer the same fate. The old prisoner waved his hand dismissively to Tan. It's nothing. I wish I could have done better, but that's the best I could do. His was the first burial I had to prepare, and they called me the caretaker ever since. I'm very sorry for your loss and the lengthy suffering you had to endure waiting for his return. He died only a few weeks after being transported here. His death was a shock to us all. He was lucky in some way. He did not suffer long. Tan nodded and swallowed the lump in her throat, trying to believe the doctor. She spoke in short sentences. I didn't know about his death until a week ago. They sent a letter informing me where to find his remains. They didn't even explain. A very impersonal letter was all I received, so cold and indifferent. I had tried to trace his whereabouts for years, but they moved the prisoners to the far north or scattered them in places where no one knew or cared. I was kept waiting in vain. She paused for a while and looked around her as if searching for something similar in this strange, desolate camp. Tan was not sure whether to continue confiding her anxiety to this stranger, or to keep silent with her bottled-up frustrations of the past decade. The old prisoner sensed her hesitation but remained motionless. He did not want to push the young widow in either direction. Let her choose whether to confide, Quang thought. Tan steered her gaze away from the mounds of red dirt, like undulating waves in the ocean, and then resumed. I guess there was something very wrong when he did not write or contact me somehow, but I did not want to give up hope. 1 week, then 1 month, then 1 year, and it went on for a decade. Could you believe it? I had to wait 10 years before knowing his fate. Tan paused again, this time looking for words, her fingers touching the brim of her straw hat. I can't describe how much I prayed. If only I could have known why there was no news from him. But I guess I survived those long years with a faint hope of reunion. If I had known of his death from the beginning, I might not have had enough courage to continue living until now. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But at least now I have an answer, even if it is of the worst kind. It's the unknowable truth that is so frightening. I cringed every time a letter arrived at the door. I was terrified to receive the news, but I also wanted to know. It's a complicated feeling. I guess it was similar to your going through this indefinite sentence. The tunnel was so dark and never-ending. There wasn't any light at the end, was there? There were times I wanted to give up, to be gone from this miserable life. But then I thought of him, of not knowing where he was, whether he was alive or dead. Then I gathered all my courage to go on. I did not want to be dead when he was still alive, if you know what I mean. I did not want to cause him any more grief in his life of little happiness and joy. It was difficult. There were rumors, of course. They haunted me during the nights and filled me days with pain and anguish, those rumors. However, there was never a definite answer from the authorities. They gave me nothing to rely on but a vague statement saying that he was being re-educated whenever I asked about his welfare. I had no address to write to him. No news had been received from the day he left. It was maddening. My state of mind was so uncertain, but they didn't care. For me, living is an inexplicable experience. Death is easier to understand if you know what I mean. Tan continued her narrative in short bursts of emotions. They were standing at the cemetery. The little mounds were in neat rows. There were hundreds of them, little waves in an ocean of dry land. Some had a single plant in the middle. Some had bushes of different wildflowers on top. Some had small hibiscus plants in various colors along the perimeter, and some were covered with different kinds of grasses. There were weeds or passion vines. They looked confusing to onlookers, but to Quang, they had a pattern that only he could understand and decipher. They were his codes to differentiate the names and ranks of the deceased prisoners. He had taken his responsibility seriously since the first burial, and by doing that, it had helped him survive the long years of imprisonment. He had a goal to pursue. With a mind to combat the condemnation of the South Vietnamese armed forces personnel to unidentifiable graves, Quang had devised that scheme to outsmart the authorities. His handwriting got smaller and smaller as he ran out of notebooks or blank paper to jot down as much information as he could for the records. The subsequent notebooks in the following years were from recycled paper, as crispy and yellow as if it had been in existence for the past 100 years. That was how strange it seemed. The prisoner's existence was so far into the past that the years were moving forward in chunks. What was supposed to be a few weeks or a few months in re-education camps became almost a decade or more for some prisoners. Some had returned to Earth for reincarnation of a better life. Quang wished them the best. Tan pulled her straw hat down a bit further to cover her entire face. She wanted to see nothing else in this sorrowful place. Thanks to this little man, the graves were well looked after, but they were still dismal. Sighing softly, Tan lifted her gaze, nevertheless. She could not find any tombstones and was puzzled by it. Why aren't there any headstones, Dr. Quang? Where's Tuan's? Quang was smaller and slower than he used to be. His muscle mass now replaced mostly by edematous tissue from lack of vitamin B12. His plumpness was a falsified appearance of weight gain. His coordination was stiff from muscle weakness, dyskinesia. However, Quang was still alert and sane. He had witnessed psychosis, bipolarity, and mental disorders among his friends throughout the years with increasing alarm. Poor diet without meat, fish, and legumes had badly affected the health of the prisoners. Many had died from malnutrition coupled with torture and depression. The prisoners had to eat whatever they could find to supplement the lack of protein and vitamins, especially B group vitamins that were essential for the formation of red blood cells, DNA, nerve cells, and the maintenance of other functions. Severe deficiencies would lead to deep depression, paranoia and delusions, memory loss, poor muscle coordination, difficulty in walking, edema, and fatigue. The list went on, and Quang had known about that. To deal with this, he forced himself to catch field rats, birds, or any live animals that he could trap for extra nourishment. He tried to encourage the inmates to preserve their energy by drinking plenty of water, chewing, moving slowly, and getting as much sleep as possible. They were hibernating, he would tell them jokingly, waiting for a new era. The more active the prisoners, the quicker their energy and nutritional reservoir became depleted. After 2 or 3 years, the damage became irreversible if left untreated for a prolonged period. Initially, the prisoners were able to manage with the rats and birds. Those unfortunate animals were abundant at first and easily caught when they ventured too close to their tents. The ill-fated rodents or birds were lifesavers to those poor souls who later on ate anything. When the rodents and birds became scarce after hundreds of thousands of prisoners in re education camps had consumed them, the reptiles and insects were the next targets. Their survival was practically dependent on that ability, and the ecosystem in Vietnam was unbalanced for decades after that. Quang was sure. On the other hand, Quang thought amusedly, the consumption of the reptiles and insects helped rebalance it somehow. Without birds and field rats as predators, those reptiles and insects could upset the protection of harvests. Geckos, lizards, cockroaches, spiders, caterpillars, snails, millipedes, praying mantis, and grasshoppers, anything that moved, became their main source of protein. Quang witnessed the saddest sight of his life at two prisoners fighting over a dead gecko as tiny as his thumb. The desperate need for sustenance had destroyed their integrity and reduced them to animals fighting for survival. Their minds only focused on one thing: how to alleviate their hunger. There was no more pride or dignity, just something, anything to eat and how to survive the day, one day at a time. They, the esteemed comrades, did not allow a headstone for any of the prisoners. Quang answered as a matter of fact. Oh, so how do you know which tomb is Tuan's? Tan's eyes widened in disbelief. That's the one. I planted a white hibiscus on his grave, and he was the first I buried. I am sure that's the one. Quang pointed to the white hibiscus bush farthest from the rose. Oh, thank you, Dr. Quang. You are so kind. Tan repeated her gratitude. You certainly need help to exhume it, Miss Tan. Even though they were all shallow graves, you still need strong men to dig them up. Yes, I know. I have already asked for help. They're arriving soon. Thanks for your concern and kindness. I don't know how to repay you, Dr. Quang, Tan said. I've got to go back to my duty. They're releasing us slowly now. My turn is soon. They informed me last week. If you'd come a week later, you might not have met me, Miss Tan. He took a deep breath. I'm one of the last prisoners here. I don't know how I managed it, but I have survived throughout the last decade. I outlived many stronger, younger men and stayed sane until the end. It was either luck or sheer determination. I'm not sure. He shook his head, almost not believing himself. Suddenly, with a quick reflex, Quang placed his foot over a moving cricket. Without taking time to think or rationalize, he picked it up and popped it into his mouth, chewed, then swallowed quickly, raw and all, out of habit. Then he said, Good luck, and best wishes for your future, Miss Tan. Tan was speechless, witnessing the old prisoner's action, but she managed to say in the end, Thank you, Dr. Quang. I wish you all the best, and please stay healthy and strong. After this ordeal, I am certain that your resilience will enable you to endure many more years of hardship, even though I truly wish that your life will be much better in the future. Yes, I hope so too. There's the Orderly Departure Program, initiated by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to rescue people like me. The esteemed comrades have been very kind to let us displaced citizens leave the country for good. We are considered debilitated, sickly, second-rate, and a burden for them in every way, Quang said bitterly. They bowed their heads to each other in the customary farewell. Quang turned and walked slowly toward the tent, feeling relieved and glad that he was able to help Tan find her husband's grave. That was his sincere wish for the lieutenant. During the 1980s, the Vietnamese government reattempted to normalize the relationship with the USA. It attempted to make fewer demands for post-war reconstruction aid and show a readiness to improve humanitarian issues. The two countries restarted negotiations in softer terms and language than initially. A full account of Americans missing in action, including the return of any remains, was required before any normalization could be effected by the U.S. Hanoi could not account for more than 2,400 missing in action in Indochina. No concessions were made on either side, and the progress was slow or non existent for some time. The US continued to enforce trade embargoes with relations at its stalemate. It was not until 1985 that Hanoi allowed the US to excavate B 52 crash sites in search of MIAs and return the remains of a number of United States servicemen between 1985 and 1987. With these efforts to improve the relations, Hanoi allowed the US to make visits to some remodeled re-education camps during that time. The only known fate of prisoners was their unmarked graves. Only when there was information released by escapees who arrived in the United States about the brutal treatment in thousands of re-education camps in Vietnam were investigations begun by the United States government. Those forgotten prisoners were released in the end through the intervention of the outside world. Or perhaps, in the end, Hanoi was tired of keeping hundreds of thousands of sickly prisoners that were by now pitifully harmless. The UNHCR also started the ODP for the prisoners and their families to migrate to various countries. In exchange for Hanoi's cooperation in matters concerning cases of MIAs, in 1994, the lifting of U.S. trade embargoes was effected with the formalization of relations resuming in 1995. After over 2 decades, diplomatic relations between the two countries were finally restored. During that time, Hanoi started to dismantle thousands of re-education camps, the last prisoners being released in 1989, 14 years after the fall of Saigon. Tan remained at the graveside until Quang disappeared from her gaze, before stepping closer to the white hibiscus bush and kneeling down. She placed her hands on top of the mound and whispered, "I am here, darling. I found you. It's far too late, but at least we have our reunion." Unable to hold them back any longer, she allowed her tears to flow freely. Some hours later, when the gravediggers finished their work, Tan went over and collected the bones, placing them in a sack. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Her feet went weak, and she had to squat on the red dirt with the heavy remains in the cloth sack. The sun had gone down completely. Darkness began to fall. There was little light except the faint illumination from the far distance in the tents. Tan wanted to leave. She must finish her journey and hurry out of here before her strength evaporated. Tan paid the gravediggers their agreed fees with a small bonus, thanking them wholeheartedly. At first, she was in doubt whether the old doctor was coherent and had pointed her to the correct grave to dig. The mounds all looked similar, without any headstones. However, she burst into tears when one of the gravediggers picked up a small wooden cross among the remains. The red dirt clinging tightly to the small object made it bulkier in size. She had to scrape it clean before her cross reappeared. It was unmistakably hers. That saddest of mornings, they had parted and said goodbye to each other, confident that it would only be a few weeks' separation. Then, before the bus carrying the prisoners and Tuan accelerated further away, Tan had found the old wooden cross in her bag. She ran after the bus and gave it to him through the window. She remembered whispering to her husband, "I want you to keep it as a symbol of faith and a reminder of me, darling." Their hands had entwined for a brief moment, with the cross in between. Tan sobbed quietly and walked slowly out of the camp, her lone figure casting a vague silhouette in the barren surroundings. The wooden cross was now lying in her palm, covered with dirt and the residue of Tuan's soul, if any.